When people travel to Taiwan, most visit Taipei, Kaohsiung, or Jiufen. But on this trip, we decided to explore a city that many international tourists completely overlooked, Chiayi. And honestly, it turned out to be one of the biggest surprises of our entire trip. In this video, we'll visit a beautiful reservoir surrounded by nature, try some incredibly fresh seafood, explore one of Taiwan's most impressive museums, and discover what makes Chiayi such a special place. If you are looking for somewhere beyond the usual tourist destinations, this video might give you some inspiration for your next trip to Taiwan. Let's explore Chiayi. We took the Taiwan high-speed rail from Jiufen to Chiayi. We had booked our tickets online in advance, and as always, the train was comfortable, clean, and incredibly convenient. Although Chiayi is known for its beautiful natural scenery, many attractions are spread out, so we decided to rent a car for a day. Finding a rental car at the last minute was surprisingly difficult, but luckily we managed to secure one the day before. I was also curious about what kinds of cars people drive in Taiwan. Our rental happened to be a Mitsubishi. I had never driven one before, even though I am in Japan, but the interior felt surprisingly spacious and comfortable.
那你可以上车看一下油表里程。那现在里程的话是58就可以，油表买。钥匙在中间那里。
Of course, driving on the opposite side took a little getting used to. Our first destination was National Palace Museum, Southern Branch. Despite the name, this is not an actual palace where the emperors lived. The museum is connected to a famous National Palace Museum in Taipei, which houses one of the world's largest collections of Chinese imperial artifacts. In other words, it is a large museum built in southern Taiwan, so visitors can enjoy part of the National Palace Museum collection as well as wider Asian culture without going to Taipei. Where is it? It is located in Taipei, near Chiayi, and it's accessible from Taiwan and other southern cities. What makes it special? Focus on Asian civilization. While the Taipei Museum mainly showcases treasures from Chinese dynasties, the southern branch highlights cultural exchanges across Asia, including China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, India, surrounding regions.
Perfect for us.
Stunning modern architecture. The buildings has futuristic design surrounded by water features, making it a popular photo spot. なんか共鳴しそうだね。Many of these treasures originally came from Forbidden City in Beijing and were brought to Taiwan by nationalist government during the Chinese Civil War. The southern branch was later established to showcase not only Chinese artifacts, but also the broader history and cultures of Asia. One thing that immediately surprised me was how quiet it was. Compared to many famous museums around the world, there were very few visitors. Inside, there were immersive projection mapping displays and beautifully designed exhibition spaces. And by pure luck, the famous Jadeite Cabbage was being exhibited here during our visit. This tiny cabbage carving is one of Taiwan's most iconic museum pieces, and while it can attract huge crowds in Taipei, Here we were able to admire it without fighting through a sea of people. What I particularly liked about this museum was how the exhibits were organized by themes rather than simply by historical periods. There were galleries dedicated to Buddhism, textile, tea culture, calligraphy, and many other topics. Instead of learning history in a straight timeline, you could see how each theme evolved across different dynasties, regions, and cultures. The tea exhibitions were especially fascinating. I realized I know surprisingly little about how tea spread across Asia and how different tea traditions developed. Taiwan today is famous for teas such as high mountain oolong and Artisan tea, but seeing the story behind tea culture made me appreciate it even more. During the Tang Dynasty, tea was often compressed into tea cakes. People would grind the tea into powder and boil it in water, almost like making a soup. In the Song Dynasty, powdered tea became popular. Tea was whisked into a frothy drink, which may sound familiar because it is considered one of the origins of Japanese matcha culture. During the Ming Dynasty, everything changed. The emperors encouraged people to stop using compressed tea cakes, and loose leaf tea became much more common. This is much closer to how many people drink tea today. In Qing Dynasty, tea culture became even more refined. Different regions developed their own style, and specialized teaware became increasingly important. Taiwan's tea culture traces many of its roots to Fujian province in China, but over time it developed its own identity. Today, Taiwan is famous for high mountain tea such as Artisan oolong, and tea preparation often focuses on bringing out dedicated aromas through multiple short infusions using small teapot and cups. What surprised me most was realizing that every cup of tea carries hundreds of years of history. Something as simple as making tea has evolved drastically across different dynasties and cultures. After the museum, we headed toward Budai Salt Mountain. For decades, salt production played an important role in this region, and the giant white salt mound has become one of the Chiayi's most recognizable landmarks. From distance, it almost looked like snow-covered hill, which feels quite surreal in southern Taiwan. We heard that surrounding saltwater landscape used to be even more impressive in the past, but changing environmental conditions has reduced the amount of water in the recent years. We bought some locally produced salt productions while visiting. Interestingly, the salt tasted much milder and smoother than I expected. Our next stop was the famous high hill wedding church. From far away, the giant glass high hill looks almost unbelievable. It's one of those places where you immediately stop and think, wait, what exactly am I looking at? There were wedding brochures available, and apparently the site is used for wedding-related events and photography. The atmosphere felt a little nostalgic, almost looks like an old amusement park attraction, which somehow added to its charm. After visiting a high-hill wedding church, we headed toward the coast. Before coming to Taiwan, I never really associated the country with seafood. When people think of Taiwanese food, they often think of beef noodle soup, xiaolongbao, bubble tea, or night markets. But when we arrived in Budai, it quickly became clear that seafood is a huge part of life here. Budai is a fishing town on Taiwan's southwest coast, and fresh seafood is everywhere. Fish markets, seafood restaurants, oyster farms, and fishing boats can all be found throughout the area. One place that was highly recommended to us was a restaurant called 1368. The name includes the phrase, "All you can eat oysters," but the system was actually a little different from what we expected. When we arrived, I immediately realized that we might be in for an adventure. The restaurant was packed with local people. Almost everything was written in Chinese. There were very few tourists. And honestly, for a moment, I had absolutely no idea what we were supposed to do. And we managed to place an order and sat down confidently. Then we waited and waited and waited some more. Nothing arrived. At that point, I started wondering whether we had somehow ordered incorrectly. Eventually, someone kindly explained that some of the food wasn't delivered to your table at all. You were supposed to go and collect it yourself. That explained a lot. Once we understood the system, things became much easier. Each table had a grill and people were cooking oysters themselves. What surprised me was how naturally everyone seemed to know exactly what to do. Nobody was explaining anything. Nobody was asking questions. Everyone just sat down and immediately started grilling. It felt like we had accidentally joined a club where everyone already knew the rules expect us. In Japan, when I visited Oyster Hut, staff often explain how to grill the oysters and how to open them safely. Here, it was completely self-service. Fortunately, I spent my university's year in a region famous for oysters. For perhaps the first time in my life, the knowledge became useful. I felt strangely prepared for this moment. If you've never cooked oyster before, there is actually a simple trick. You place the shell with the deeper bowl-shaped side face down. That way, all of the delicious juices stay inside while cooking. After a few minutes, the shell begins to open slightly. Once there is a small gap, you can carefully insert tongs, separate the shell, cut the mussel, and the oyster is ready to eat. At least that's the theory. In reality, some oysters cooperate and some absolutely don't know. A few of them seem determined to stay closed forever. Watching everyone around us confidently opening oyster while we struggle with a few stubborn ones was pretty entertaining. Eventually though, we got the hang of it. The oysters themselves was very fresh. Compared to some oysters I've eaten in Japan, they were slightly smaller, but they had a pleasant sweetness and clean ocean flavor. The real surprise was the sauce. I don't know exactly what ingredients were used, but it tasted deeper and richer than the soy sauce I'm familiar with. There was a savory seafood flavor that worked perfectly with the oysters, and then came the combination I wasn't expecting: Taiwanese milk tea. For some reason, grilled oyster and sweet milk tea turned out to be an amazing combination. The salty oysters, smoky chocolate flavor, rich sauce, and sweet tea somehow balanced each other perfectly. It sounds strange, but it worked. One of my favorite parts of the experience wasn't even the food. It was simply sitting there and watching local families and groups of friends enjoy their evening together. There was no tourist performance, no special show, just people eating, talking, laughing, and enjoying fresh seafood. It felt like a glimpse into everyday life. After dinner, we walked around the nearby seafood market. Fresh fish, oyster, shrimp, and shellfish were everywhere. The smell of the ocean filled the air, and the whole area had the energy of a working fishing town. By the end of the evening, I realized that Budai has given us something I always hoped to find while traveling. Not just famous attraction, but experience that feels genuinely local. And for me, sitting around the grill full of oyster with local family nearby turned out to be one of the most memorable moments of our time in Chiayi. Before continuing our trip around Chiayi, let me show you the hotel we stayed at, the Oriental Pearl International Hotel. Overall, it was a comfortable place to stay and a good base for exploring the area by car. Since many of Chiayi's attractions are spread out, having a hotel with easy parking and plenty of space was definitely convenient. One thing that immediately caught my attention was the furniture in the room. There was a large wooden table that looked much more elegant than what you would normally expect in a hotel room. At first, I assumed it was simply part of the interior design, but then I noticed information suggesting that some of the furniture was actually available for purchase. I've stayed in many hotels before, but I don't think I've ever stayed in one that felt particularly like a furniture showroom. The wooden furniture gave the room a warm and traditional feeling, and it was a nice change from the standard modern hotel style. The room itself was clean, spacious, and comfortable. After a full day of driving and sightseeing, it was a good place to relax. There was, however, one thing that made me laugh. The hotel advertised that it had gym, so naturally I decided to go check it out. I followed the sign, expecting a fitness room with several machines, maybe some weights, and a dedicated workout space. Instead, I found what appeared to be a treadmill sitting in a hallway. Just a treadmill in the corridor. I honestly stood there for a moment wondering if it was a right place. It worked, and technically speaking, it was exercise equipment, so I suppose the hotel wasn't wrong when it said that there was a gym. But I couldn't stop thinking about the guest room nearby. If someone decided to do a full marathon training session at 6 in the morning, I wonder what the people next door would think. Still, I have to give the hotel points for creativity. It may not have been the biggest gem I've ever seen, but it was certainly one of the most memorable. Overall, we had a pleasant stay and it provided everything we needed for our time in Chiayi. As the evening approached, we headed to Renyitan Reservoir. After the busy day of museums, coastal scenery, and seafood, it was nice to slow down and enjoy a quieter side of Chiayi. The reservoir was larger than I expected, and the atmosphere felt incredibly peaceful. One thing that caught my attention was the number of people flying kites. There were families, couples, and groups of friends gathered near the water, enjoying the cool evening breeze. Watching the kites float across the sky above the reservoir created a surprisingly relaxing scene. It felt less like a tourist attraction and more like a place where local people came to unwind after work, exercise, or simply spend time together. And I found myself thinking about how much of our entertainment today happens through screens. We spend so much time on our phone, computers, and social media that something as simple as flying a kite can almost feel unusual. Seeing people enjoying such an analog activity made me realize that perhaps simple things like nature, fresh air, and open spaces still have an important place in our lives. Maybe that's why places like this continue to attract people. Sometimes all you need is a little wine, a kite, and beautiful view. As the sun slowly began to set, the light reflected across the water, making the entire reservoir feel even more peaceful. It was one of those moments that reminded me that not every moment a memorable travel experience has to be a famous landmark. Sometimes just observing everyday life can be equally rewarding. After spending some time at the reservoir, we headed to a dinner at Jiayi Bakery Pizza and Udon Tea. The restaurant is known for its freshly baked bread, pizzas, and tea, and it had a cozy atmosphere that made it feel very welcoming. We ordered several dishes, including a chicken curry and cranberry pizza. The chicken curry immediately caught my attention because of the way it was served. I usually think of curry as something where all the ingredients are cooked together in one pot. But here the curry was presented on top, creating a completely different visual impression. We also tried the cranberry pizza. Cranberries are not exactly the first thing I imagine when I think about pizza toppings, but the balance of sweetness and tartness worked surprisingly well. It was one of those dishes that sounded unusual on paper but made perfect sense after the first bite. Another surprise was soup. It contained seaweed, which immediately reminded me of miso soup back home. But instead of appearing in a Japanese-style soup, it was used in a completely different context. The simple bowl of soup made me realize something interesting. Travel often teaches us that many of the things we consider normal are really just habits we've grown up with. I tend to associate seaweed with miso soup and curry with ingredients simmered together in the same pot, but neither of those ideas is in universal rule. They are simply the version I'm familiar with. Experiencing food in different places is a reminder that there were many ways to prepare, serve, and enjoy the same ingredients. That's one of the reasons I enjoy traveling so much. It's not just about seeing new places, it's about discovering different ways of thinking. Between the peaceful evening and Renyitan Reservoir and the unexpectedly creative dinner, the day ended on a perfect note. Even after a full day of exploring Chiayi, the city was still finding ways to surprise us. Chiayi turned out to be one of the biggest surprises of our Taiwan trip. From fascinating museum and peaceful nature to fresh seafood and unique local experiences, there was so much more to discover than we expected. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure. Bye!